I want to tell you something that might sound a little crazy. For almost 15 years, every time I wanted a new apple tree in my yard, I drove to the nursery, spent $30 to $50 on a grafted whip, brought it home, babied it for 2 seasons, and then hoped it didn't die. And half the time, it did die. I'd lose it to transplant shock, a harsh winter, or some rootstock disease I didn't understand. I figured that was just part of the deal. You want apple trees, you pay for apple trees. That's how it works, right? Well, about 6 years ago, I was visiting a family outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, right in the heart of Lancaster County. The Stoltzfus family. They had what I can only describe as an ocean of apple trees. Rows upon rows, all different ages, some clearly decades old with thick, gnarled trunks, and then younger ones stepping down in size like a staircase. I'm talking maybe 80 or 90 trees on a property that wasn't all that big. And I asked Samuel, the father, how much did all this cost you? He looked at me like I'd asked the strangest question he'd ever heard. He said, this all came from one tree. One tree my grandfather planted. Every tree you see came from that one. I'll be honest with you. I stood there in that orchard and felt like a fool. Here I was spending hundreds of dollars over the years buying individual trees from garden centers, when this man's family had built an entire orchard from a single tree his grandfather put in the ground 60 or 70 years ago. And they weren't using any fancy equipment, no greenhouse, no growth hormones, no tissue culture lab. Just a sharp knife, some understanding of how trees actually work, and a whole lot of patience. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how the Amish turn one apple tree into a full producing orchard, step by step, using techniques you can start in your own backyard this season with tools you probably already own. And make sure you stick around until the very end, because I'll reveal a surprisingly simple winter technique, involving nothing but a common potato, that can literally double your grafting success rate, a secret I've never seen shared on any other gardening channel. Now, look, I came into this as a skeptic. I've read the extension service pamphlets. I've watched the university videos on grafting. I even took a workshop once at a botanical garden where we practiced on potted rootstock with wax and rubber bands, the whole 9 yards. And I walked away thinking, this is fussy. This is complicated. And honestly, it's easier to just buy a tree. But what I realized, spending time with the families in Lancaster County, and later with an old order community in Holmes County, Ohio, is that I had been thinking about apple trees completely backward. I was treating each tree like a product to purchase. They were treating each tree like a living library of genetics you could copy forever. That shift changed everything for me, and it didn't require buying a single product. The Amish have a concept that comes through in their Pennsylvania Dutch called gelassenheid. It roughly translates to yielding, or letting be, or submitting to the natural order of things. And it runs through everything they do, from how they raise their children to how they farm. When it comes to orchards, gelassenheid means you don't fight the tree. You don't force a variety into soil it doesn't want to grow in. You don't try to shortcut biology. You work with what the tree is already trying to do, which is reproduce and spread. Every apple tree in the world is already trying to make more of itself. It sends out suckers from the roots. It drops seeds. It pushes out new growth every spring that contains its full genetic blueprint. The Amish didn't invent some secret technique. They just learned to cooperate with what the tree was already doing. And here's where the science backs them up completely. Modern pomology, that's the fancy word for the science of fruit growing, has confirmed that clonal propagation through grafting and rooting produces trees that are genetically identical to the parent. The fruit, the disease resistance, the growth habit, it's all preserved. When you plant an apple seed, you get a random genetic lottery. But when you graft or root a cutting, you get an exact copy. The Amish figured this out through observation over generations. Plant scientists caught up about 100 years later. So, let me walk you through the actual method, and I'm going to give it to you the way it was given to me, which is in a logical order that follows the calendar year. There are 5 core techniques the Amish use, and they layer them together depending on the season and what material they have available. The first technique is collecting scion wood, and this is where everything starts. Scion wood is just a fancy term for small, dormant branches that you cut from the tree you want to copy. You want to collect these in late winter, after the tree has gone fully dormant but before the buds start to swell in spring. For zones 3 and 4, that's typically late February to mid-March. Zones 5 through 7, you're looking at late January through February. Zones 8 and 9, you might be collecting as early as late December or January because your trees break dormancy earlier. What you're looking for is last year's growth, meaning branches that grew during the previous growing season. They'll have smooth bark, about the diameter of a pencil, roughly 6 to 9.5 millimeters thick. You want pieces that are about 20 to 30 centimeters long with at least 3 or 4 healthy buds on them. Cut them with sharp, clean pruners at a slight angle. The Stoltzfus family showed me how they wrap their scion wood in damp newspaper, not soaking wet, just damp, then seal it in a plastic bag and store it in the back of the refrigerator. Not the freezer, the refrigerator, around 0.5 to 4.5 degrees Celsius. They told me their scion wood stays viable for 2 to 3 months stored this way, which gives you a big window to work with. I started doing this 4 years ago and I've had scion wood keep perfectly for 10 weeks in my fridge. My wife thinks I'm crazy, by the way. There's a shelf in there that's nothing but bundles of sticks. The second technique is the whip and tongue graft. This is the backbone of the whole operation. This is how you take a piece of scion wood and attach it to a rootstock or an existing tree so it grows as one unit. Now, I know grafting sounds intimidating, but I'll be straight with you, if you can whittle a stick, you can do this graft. The Amish teach their kids this at 10 or 11 years old. Here's how it works: you take your scion wood and make a long, sloping cut about 4 centimeters long on one end. Then you make a small, downward slit about 1.2 centimeters deep into that sloping cut, roughly 1/3 of the way down from the tip. That's the tongue. You do the exact same thing on the rootstock or the branch you're grafting onto, with a matching angle, length, and tongue. Then you slide the 2 pieces together so the tongues interlock and the cambium layers line up. The cambium is that thin, green layer just under the bark. That's the living highway of the tree, it's where all the growth happens. If the cambium on your scion touches the cambium on your rootstock, the graft will take. You don't need them to match perfectly all the way around, but you need good contact on at least one side, ideally 2. The Amish wrap the joint tightly with strips of rubber, and I mean actual rubber cut from old inner tubes, though you can use grafting tape or even parafilm. Then they seal any exposed cuts with a mixture of beeswax, lard, and rosin. You can buy commercial grafting wax, too, it works fine. University of Vermont research showed that whip and tongue grafts have a success rate of 70 to 90% when the cambium is properly aligned, which is significantly higher than simple splice grafts. Timing matters here. You want to graft in early spring when the rootstock is just starting to push sap, but the scion wood is still dormant. That's the sweet spot. For zones 5 through 7, that's usually late March through mid-April. Zones 3 and 4 push that to late April. Zones 8 and 9, you might be grafting in early March. The third technique is cleft grafting onto established trees, and this is the one that really blew my mind. See, the Amish don't just graft onto young rootstock. They graft onto mature trees to either add new varieties or rejuvenate old trees that aren't producing well. They call this top working a tree, and it means you can take a tired old apple tree that's been putting out mealy, wormy fruit and completely change its variety in 2 to 3 years. You saw off a branch, usually 5 to 10 centimeters in diameter, and you split the stump down the middle about 5 centimeters deep, using a heavy knife or a small hatchet. Then you prepare 2 scion pieces with long, wedge-shaped cuts on both sides, tapering them down to about 5 centimeters. Insert them into the split, one on each side, making sure the cambium layers align on the outer edges. The Amish taught me to leave the outer edge of each scion just slightly proud of the bark on the stalk, perhaps by a hair's width. The reason is the cambium on the scion sits just slightly inside the bark line, and you want cambium touching cambium, not bark touching bark. You seal the whole thing with grafting wax, paying extra attention to the top of the split where moisture could get in. I top-worked 3 branches on an old Golden Delicious in my yard 2 springs ago with Honeycrisp scion wood, and all 3 took. This year, those branches produced their first apples from an old tree I was about ready to cut down. The 4th technique is what the Amish call stooling, and the university folks call it mound layering. This is how they produce their own rootstock instead of buying it, which is the real key to making the whole system self-sustaining. You take a young apple tree, or even a vigorous sucker growing from the roots of an existing tree, and in early spring, you cut it back hard, right down to about 5 centimeters above the ground. That sounds brutal, I know, but the tree responds by sending up a cluster of new shoots. When those shoots are about 15 to 20 centimeters tall, you mound soil up around their bases, burying the bottom 5 to 10 centimeters of each shoot. As the shoots keep growing, you keep mounding, adding another few centimeters of soil or compost every couple of weeks until the mound is about 20 to 25 centimeters high. What happens under that soil is the buried portions of the shoots develop their own root systems. By fall, you've got multiple rooted shoots that you can separate from the mother plant, dig up, and transplant as independent rootstock. Each one is ready to receive a graft the following spring. One mother stool can produce 5 to 15 rooted shoots per year, and the Amish families I've spent time with keep their stool beds going for decades. The research out of Cornell confirms that mound layering is one of the most reliable methods for clonal rootstock production, with rooting success rates above 80% in most apple rootstock cultivars, including M26, M7, and MM106. The 5th technique is air layering, and this one is almost magical to watch. It's less common in the Amish orchard tradition, but I saw it used by a family in the Elkhart-LaGrange settlement in Indiana for propagating especially prized heritage varieties. You select a healthy branch on an existing tree, usually about pencil thickness to thumb thickness, and you cut a ring of bark off of it. You remove a band about 2.5 centimeters wide, going all the way around the branch, stripping off the bark and the cambium layer down to the white wood underneath. Then you wrap that wound with a big handful of damp sphagnum moss. Squeeze it into a ball around the branch and wrap the whole thing in plastic, tying both ends tight with string or tape. Over the next 6 to 12 weeks, roots grow into that moss ball right from the wounded area. The tree is essentially rooting a branch while it's still attached and being fed by the mother tree. Once you see roots filling the moss, you cut the branch off below the new roots and pot it up or plant it out. For zones 3 through 5, start air layers in late May or June. Zones 6 through 8, you can begin in May. Zone 9, as early as April. I started doing this 3 years ago and the success rate honestly surprised me. I'd say 7 out of 10 air layers root successfully for me, and those rooted branches already have mature wood, so they establish faster than a grafted whip in many cases. If you're finding value in learning how the Amish build entire orchards from a single tree, hit subscribe to Sovereign Garden. I've got a whole lot more of these coming, and each one goes deep into how traditional communities handle the garden differently than anything you'll hear at the garden center. Let me share some patterns I've noticed in conventional gardening, and how this Amish approach handles things differently. I did most of these myself for years, so no judgment here. The first pattern is buying a new tree every time you want a new tree. It sounds obvious when I say it out loud, but most home gardeners, myself included for a long time, treat apple trees like a consumable product. You want one, you go buy one. The nursery tree costs you $30 to $60. It may or may not be adapted to your specific microclimate, and you have no idea how the rootstock was grown or what viruses it might be carrying. The Amish approach is to build a self-sustaining propagation system. Once you have one healthy tree you trust, one tree whose fruit you love and whose vigor you've observed over years, you never need to buy another tree again. You clone it. You make your own rootstock through stooling. You graft your proven scion onto your proven roots. The whole system feeds itself. The second pattern is ignoring rootstock entirely. Most home gardeners pick an apple tree based on the variety name on the tag, Honeycrisp, Fuji, Gala. But they never ask what rootstock it's grafted onto. And that rootstock determines how big the tree gets, how soon it fruits, how well it handles your soil, how cold hardy it is, everything. The Amish know their rootstock the way you know your neighbors. They select rootstock for their specific conditions, their specific soil, their specific winters. When you propagate your own rootstock through stooling from trees that are already thriving on your property, you're automatically selecting for genetics that work in your exact environment. You can't buy that at a nursery. The third pattern is over-relying on grafting wax and tape. I've seen gardeners slather on so much wax and wrap so much tape that the graft joint can't breathe. The wax cracks, moisture gets trapped, and you get rot or fungal infection right at the graft union. The Amish use minimal sealing. They told me the graft union should be snug enough that it almost doesn't need sealing at all. The wrapping is structural, to hold the joint together. The wax is just to keep it from drying out for the first few weeks until the cambium starts to knit. One thin coat. That's it. If you need a lot of wax to hold things together, your cuts weren't good enough and you need to redo them. The fourth pattern is giving up after a failed graft. Look, grafting is a skill. Your first attempts might fail. Your second attempts might fail. I had a season where I went 0 for 8 on whip and tongue grafts, and I almost quit trying. But here's what the Amish understand that I didn't. Failure in grafting is almost always one of three things: the cambium didn't line up, the scion would dried out before the union healed, or you grafted at the wrong time in the season. That's it. It's not mysterious. Once you diagnose which of those three problems got you, you fix it next time. Samuel Stoltzfus told me something I'll never forget. He said, "The tree wants to heal. Your job is just to not get in the way." That goes right back to Gelassenheit, yielding to what the tree is already trying to do. Now, here's something I picked up from an Amish family in Holmes County that I haven't seen mentioned in any gardening guide. And this is the potato trick I teased at the beginning. When you're collecting scion wood in late winter, and you know you won't be grafting for several weeks, take each scion stick and push the bottom end about 4 centimeters into a raw potato, just a regular old potato from the kitchen. Then wrap the potato and scion together in damp newspaper and put the whole thing in the refrigerator. What the potato does is provide a constant, slow release of moisture to the cut end of the scion. It keeps the base of the scion wood from drying out and sealing over, which means when you finally make your grafting cuts weeks later, the cambium at the base is still fresh and alive and ready to bond. The woman who showed me this, she was maybe 70 years old and had hands like leather. She said her family had been storing scion wood in potatoes since before anyone could remember. I tested this side by side 3 winters ago. I stored half my scion wood the regular way, in damp newspaper and a bag, and the other half with the potato method. The regularly stored wood had maybe a 60% graft success rate that spring. The potato stored would hit over 85%. Same varieties, same rootstock, same grafting technique. The only difference was the potato. It's almost too simple to believe, but the science makes sense. The potato maintains humidity right at the cut surface without waterlogging it, which prevents both desiccation and rot. I've done it every year since, and the results hold up. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. You don't need $100 and a trip to the nursery to grow your orchard. You need one good tree, a sharp knife, some patience, and a willingness to work with what the tree is already trying to do. The Amish have been building orchards this way for generations because when you're feeding a family of 8 to 12 people from your own land, you can't afford to waste money on something you can grow yourself. Every tree in your yard is a mother tree waiting to populate your whole property if you'll just let it teach you how. Start this winter by collecting some scion wood. Try 1 graft this spring. If it fails, try 2 the next year. Within 5 years, you can have a dozen trees, all from the one you started with. That's not a fantasy. That's exactly what I watched happen in my own backyard once I stopped buying trees and started making them. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you tried grafting before? Did it work? Did it fail miserably? Either way, tell me about it because I learn as much from your experiences as you do from mine. Hit subscribe to Sovereign Garden if you want more of these deep dives into how traditional cultures approach the garden. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.